alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is returning guest and just general boss, Jim Christina. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thanks, Tim. You know, I always love being on this show because it's just so fun.
Oh, thank you. That's kind of the idea. We try to have a good time here.
Good.
Yeah, what have you been up to lately, Jim? I mean, we've talked pretty recently, but not so much in this large scheme of things, you know?
Well, I had, I finished my book, Jefferson's Chance, which is now climbing up in the Amazon sales.
Beautiful.
In my book, Jonah Blue has sold over now 12,500 copies. So I'm really excited about that. That means it's getting out there, and that's a good thing. And I just released a book of poetry and lyrics for songs that I had from 1967 to 1983. And I copyright the compilation in 1983 under the title, That's All You Get. And I finally decided this year that I was going to do something with it, and it took me 60 days to get it out of the Library of Congress. So, that and $365. So I've got it all. It's all done. In fact, I sent you a copy of a working document. But it's undercover now. You can find it on Amazon. It's $6.95, and it's just it tells not only the lyric or the poetry, but it also gives a brief intro to each piece and where my brain was at the time that I wrote it.
Oh, real cool. I have great respect for poetry and lyrics and poetry. They're close to my heart, indeed. I mean, I like a lot of music. I like a lot of different kinds of, the little stuff that goes into, but the words are always very important to me.
Right. Well, I had a guy I was in music business with for years and years. We sat down. We were probably into our fourth or fifth beer one night, and he said, music and notes and songs, and he says the music can come and go. He said, but the lyric is forever.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, yeah, that's a great point. And so I put that in the book. That's in there too.
Oh yeah. So, actually, that reminds me, because actually this guy wrote this. This guy, I mean, he was active about the same time you wrote. Well, early in the process where you were writing these poems and stuff.
Uh-huh.
But have you ever heard of Phil Oakes? Folk singer.
Name is familiar. I'm not sure that I have, but I know the name.
He's just the guy that comes to mind when I think about lyrics these days. Him and Harry Chapin. Harry Chapin's more the old school for me. I think
right.
Of that variety. But there, though I like a whole ton of different kinds of music. Even though I just named two folk singers, people. I'm a metalhead at my heart. I'm very much a metalhead.
Harry Chapin was like the original singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
And that was his belief, and even in my stuff, I have a comment that I make in my small forethought, and it says, "As a singer-songwriter, my focus was always on feelings. The wonder of the craft was a magnificent bonus."
Oh, that's a good line. You can take that line to the Library of Congress, I guess.
I did.
And you sure did. So so your fiction is mostly westerns, right? Or
Correct.
Is it all westerns?
No, it's all westerns.
Just to remind people who haven't heard you on the earlier episodes, since the audience has been growing lately. And this new one, I think we talked about Jefferson's Chance last time you were on the program.
Right.
But and that's out now. You said it was climbing the charts. That's exciting.
It's getting some good sales. It's getting some good feet underneath it, and it's. I think it's gonna climb. It's gonna be a slower climb than Jonah Blue, because Jonah Blue is used in some colleges in the history departments. So because of the historical references, but Jefferson's Chance is a good solid story, and I think it's a better story than Jonah Blue. Because it tells a story of friendship and how friends just deal with each other as friends. So it's and plus the fact that who has to die, and just people die. That's just but it's a great story.
Okay. I mean, I think it's interesting how you say these, it's one of those things. Isn't it always the case where the creator of multiple works is like, I like that one better. It's not going to do as well, but I like it better. And that's definitely how I felt a lot of stuff. But it won't be as quick. It'll be more of a slow burn.
Being a writer, and this is my 15th book, I think. I tend to go back and reread my earlier stuff, and I like it as well. So I just go, wow. But I still think Jefferson's Chance is probably one of the best ones I've written.
Oh, that's great. And it's great that, later as you move on, you keep writing better books. That's kind of the thought, the hope, right?
Well, that's the way it should be, I hope. I mean,
absolutely. You'll get better at the skills. You'll learn to use the craft.
Sure. I mean, I even know where to put commas now. So, I mean, I'm in good shape.
You're a step ahead of me then. I still count on a lot of other help to get my commas.
Oh, me too. My editor goes about through. She's known as the comma queen. She finds places where she says commas should go that I didn't think they should go, but I guess. Yeah,
mostly I put commas places they shouldn't be. That's my point. But anyway, it's probably a little bit in the weeds there.
We digress.
Yeah, we digress. I'm still, and I know, and I already kind of digressed by bringing up your westerns, because I really am interested in the songwriting angle here, and the craft of poetry as well is fascinating to me. I mean, I studied poetry in college in large part because when you study British literature, novels, prose literature didn't appear in the Western world really.
No,
until like the 18th century.
No,
it wasn't a big deal until after Shakespeare, by far. So, like all the other books are basically poetry from back then.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are books of sonnets and and pages and pages and pages of rhyme, and you go, whoa, how do I do this? But
you get back to the oldest books too, Gilgamesh, written on a big old stone tablet.
Yeah, and my creative writing, you always have to have a little episode of poetry in there, and it's like my creative writing teacher said, in poetry, the words don't necessarily have to rhyme, but the thought has to continue. And I thought, wow, okay, I can do that.
Yeah, no, that's just a great summation.
That's what I thought, because I was just I think when I took creative writing, I was like 28. So no, I was 26. 26.
Okay.
But
I took when I was studying creative writing. I mean, I read books like The Fairy Queen, which was of course never finished. Do you know that one? You've ever heard of that?
I know of it.
Okay, because that one was written by, I believe, Edmund Spenser, and he was in exile. He's an Englishman, and he'd been exiled to Ireland, I think. Or Scotland. He'd been exiled to Scotland by the Queen, and he was writing this poem about this awesome fairy queen who was like it's an Arthurian poem, and he was writing this poem about this queen that was supposed to represent the queen he wanted to bring him back from exile.
Right.
Do you know that story?
I know. I mean, the
story of the writing of it. I mean,
well, but I do know the book only because I have to say this quietly. My ex-wife had a copy. And I can remember, and it was very old, and I can remember looking at the cover. That's when they used to emboss the covers, and it was a picture of the fairy queen, and it was Faerie queen. Yeah. But I don't know the story of it being written. I just know
just one. I told you most of it, but there was one last bit. Is that Edmund Spenser never completed the book? It's an incomplete work. Even though it's enormously long, he wrote about a quarter of what he wanted to do, and then he passed away in exile. So it's really kind of a sad story, but I think it's kind of amusing from a historical perspective. I think it's kind of funny that he's like, I will write he was going to write a 24-book epic instead of a 12-book epic, and he only made it 6 books in. So he's like, I guess his brain was bigger than his stomach, whatever. He had greater ambitions, let's say, than he could follow up on.
Well, that's probably true.
Which is too bad. I mean, it's true for most of us, though. I don't know why I went off on that. My bad. So anyway, your poetry and your song lyrics here. Yeah. So is it more in the Western mold? I haven't had a chance to look at a lot of it. Do you have a lot of songwriter stuff in there?
No, there's only one Western one in there, and it's called, golly, I forgot. Let me look at the table of contents here. I've got it right up on my screen.
Sure.
Let me see. It's about the. Oh wow! It's about the Cheyenne.
Okay.
Oh, it's called Soldier Man.
Hmm.
And it's about the Cheyenne breaking away from Fort Robinson and wanting to go back home to their ancestral hunting grounds.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Actually, if there's this really interesting poetry book. I live in Minnesota, and there's this really interesting poetry book I actually had to read by a guy who was kind of forcibly. This is the theme today. Is people were forced to live places they didn't want to live. This old Native American he moved to Minnesota because he kind of had to, and he was teaching somewhere. He was a poet, of course. He wrote the book, and his book was called Evil Corn. And it was a poetry book. It was kind of he did not like Minnesota. Let me put it that way. That's basically what the book was about. That was an interesting one. And I always remember it because he made references to like Lovecraft's creatures and stuff in some of the poems, like Azathoth, those weird monsters from beyond space or whatever. And that always gets me. So.
You'll find in this book there's songs about sailing and whaling and impressed seamen from the War of 1812. There's a Vietnam thing in there called air assault. There is anti-war songs, burning the holy city, and there's all kinds of stuff in there.
Wow, yeah, sounds like a great collection. Actually, I actually can't. I need to dig into that when we're done here. But unfortunately, I have a book of my own to read tonight. Soon enough.
It was sent to you to have. If you want to read it, fine. If not,
it sounds fascinating, and I do like poetry, like I said.
So, I mean, you can just a lot of it. You can just take notes with it, and you can kind of play it in your brain with music.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds great. Yeah. So. All right, so we I'm not sure if we put the poetry to rest at this point, but enough of that for the moment. We can move on a little bit because there is definitely, I mean, because I don't know if you write more prose lately. Is that true? Would you say you write prose lately, or because this book is actually older work, correct?
It's older works, but it's been done. It was released in February of this year.
Okay, great.
And it's actually I think March was when the actual release date was. But it's all older works. I haven't worked in any poetry in a long time, so.
Okay, and that's kind of what I was thinking because you mentioned the dates where you wrote all this stuff, and boy, it was before me. Let's just say that. Anyway, definitely before I was running around. At any rate, so when it comes to your fiction, are you working on any projects right now?
I actually am. I'm working on one. I'm reintroducing the very first Western character that I ever wrote about. His name is Taggart Richmond. He's known as the Hunter. He's a manhunter, and he's. I brought him back because he's been shot at his hunting camp up in the mountains in Arizona and left for dead, but he's not. And the story is that there's going to be a whole bunch of convolutions in this story. But it's a story about again survival and persistence and will, mostly personal will.
Okay, yeah, sounds gritty. Sounds kind of dark.
Well, I don't write anything that's not gritty, actually.
Well, from the sound of your other works, yeah, I'd agree.
I've got, I mean, people. My wife says that you have more ingenious ways of killing people than I've ever heard.
Oh, isn't that kind of the classic writer thing?
It is, and you try to outdo yourself every time you write a story.
See, I've never really been that kind of writer, but yeah, I totally understand that with the Western or the murder mystery. A bunch of genres really lend themselves to that.
Yeah, but a lot of them weren't shooting and fighting. A lot of them, the deaths that happened were accidents.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine that as well. Actually, yeah, just because you got falling. I don't know, the guy who got killed by a tree falling over. That's real life.
Yeah.
So this sort of thing. Yeah. A tree cut down himself fell the wrong way. Come on.
Yeah, a sign falling off of a holder on a rotten piece of wood hits a guy in the head and just decapitates him.
Yikes.
And it's an accident. It just happened. Yeah. Nobody knows why. It just does. You can thank Richard Polinelli for that one, actually.
Ooh, that's gruesome. I can picture it, and I wish I couldn't. But yeah, I mean that goes for a lot of stuff. I've been noticing actually. Speaking of killing characters, though, because in this fantasy novel I just finished, it wasn't exactly gritty, but for the most part, I mean it is fairly dark fantasy. I've got to say, but probably not on the level of Signs decapitating people.
No, well, that happens very seldom.
No, I'm sure you can't do that more than once. I'd imagine it would get kind of weird.
Exactly. People kind of expect it after a while.
Yeah, they see it coming. They look up and they dodge.
Exactly.
But I was thinking recently about how when it comes to a death scene specifically, how much do you need? I mean, if you build a character up over the course of a book, if the character's been around in the book for a while, do you feel the need to deliver a particular kind of gravitas to their end?
No, I feel the need to, if I'm going to kill somebody off, I want to make sure that the timing is absolutely right in the book, number one. Yeah. And number two is never let it be a lesser death than he deserves.
Okay. Interesting.
He always gets a death that he deserves somehow.
It's got to be fitting.
It has to be fitting, or it's no fun to write it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I've noticed that. I mean, especially when I was early on, basically finger painting my second novel, especially, there were characters in there like, well, I just kind of line them up. These are the ones that are going to die at the beginning of the book, and then eventually, over the years, I kind of stopped doing that because I thought it would be more impactful to say, well, some of my characters are probably not going to be killed because they're the main character, and they kind of have to keep going if I want to write a series.
Right.
But on the other hand, and also they're the perspective characters most of the time, so that makes it a little harder to wipe them out, and keep the story moving. Sure. But the thing is, one last bit. The thing is, I thought is like picking the character, just saying like, oh yeah, the character is really doing something dangerous could be useful as a way to provide some perspective on it.
Well, I characters to me have to serve a purpose. They're just not there to waste pages. And there's, once the character has served his purpose after 2 or 3 books, then you can't just stop writing about him because everybody wants to know what happened to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you kill him off, it's a righteous kill. It's like I had a character that in my first book named Jolly Goodman, and he was the best friend of the hunter, but his character had served its purpose up through the 3rd book. And by the time we got to the 4th book, Jolly wasn't needed any longer. I'm sure in his mind the hunter needed him, but see, these characters become real for me. But of course, in the literary sense, Jolly's time had passed, and so I had to figure out a way to get rid of Jolly that was germane to the story first, and it had to be a way that didn't disturb the reader all that much, other than the fact that they were getting rid of a character that they probably all liked a lot.
Right.
So I had this guy Jeff Stryker was chasing, kill him in the barn. So it worked out.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So, because killing off like a series character, that's something I'm not very skilled at yet. I've not had much practice, a character, even if it's a recurring side character.
Right.
Because the reader does take such a liking to them a lot of the time, and there was this kind of, in the independent world where we both kind of swim currently, at least to some degree, there's definitely a kind of perspective on it, like guys like former guest in this show, Michael Anderle, and a bunch of writers that are kind of following in his footsteps, where you don't kill off characters, because it upsets people. Well, and
that may be true to some writers. I mean,
some genres too, yeah.
In some genres, but having been in that position in real life of losing friends in combat and losing friends in that particular way. I know that people don't last forever, and he could be your best friend, and he could be sitting right next to you and take a bullet through his head. Now he's gone.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do a death in a book, that's the way it should be done. He's here 1 minute, the next minute he's gone, and you go, "Whoa, what happened?" But
yeah, just
again,
that kind of suddenness, that kind
yeah,
of impact that
it,
it has
it
for the other characters because it's just a sudden change, a shift
it
of
has a little shock to your
absence.
system, and you just go, wow, Yes, but you have to keep on writing because the story is not done yet.
Right. And that's really fascinating because actually I think I came to a similar point of view, even though I've never been in a combat situation. Thank goodness. I don't think I would be one of the guys who made it back if I ended up in a war.
We all
But,
thought that, Tim.
oh boy,
Every one of us. We all thought it.
Scary. I just can't imagine. Anyway, I can't imagine personally being in that kind of terrible situation. And it just sounds so, I don't know, like you said, just jarring. Yeah, but every day, you've got to be afraid of that every day. You got to deal with that every day. Anyway, what am I trying to say here? I got a little derailed there. But the suddenness, that's one of the key things. The sudden shift of it changed everything, but it happens in a second, and you can't really you can't stop it. You can't go back and change it, and that makes it feel really. I mean, and obviously in my genres like fantasy, there's pretty common people will come back from the dead occasionally.
Sure,
people there'll be some means or whatever.
Sure,
but most of the time, I think that's kind of cheap, and it does kind of wreck the story a lot of the time.
Well, maybe
not. It depends on the story. I don't want to be pointing fingers here.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I'm not going to name names though. I'm not going to name names. I think people will know who they are. But I've got to say, it seems to me that if you're just not going to kill off characters, that's okay. I wrote one book where the stakes just weren't life and death most of the time, and the kids and the characters were mostly young. So I figured killing them would be. Well, it just wasn't appropriate, and I'd set up a system where there could be stuff happening that was not really all that dangerous for them. That was still quite dramatic. But and that was it was because things were happening in this kind of dream world Matrix environment, but it was much safer than the Matrix because if you died in there, you just woke up. You didn't die in the real world.
Yeah.
But I've also had, and so that one to me though, I felt like that was a little more difficult because the stakes were lower, just kind of inherently. But maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, I feel like the stakes don't always have to be life and death. And I don't know. Whatever. That's a tangent, and I'm not being very good about it today.
But I wrote one book that actually stretched itself into two, and how I don't know, it just did. And it's called The Return, and the first part of the book is called The Dark Angel. And in that book, the Dark Angel is a demon that takes over men that have lost their faith, preachers that have lost their faith. And his power is building throughout this entire book until this guy, Jeff Stryker, finally takes him out. And the neat thing about it is when he shoots this guy, all of a sudden this thing comes out of him, and this man that's laying on the ground looks at him and says, "Why?" It's like, what did I do? Well, he had no clue what was going on. Because this thing was doing it. And then the second part of the book is called The Return. And this spirit actually returns. And this time he's in a preacher's form in Louisiana. And he's got this big pirate crew, and they're going after him again. And Stryker finally realizes this is the same entity that he chased throughout Arizona. Only different guys.
No, I've got to read that one. That sounds like my cup of tea. Western with weird elements. Yeah.
I'll tell you what you do. You send me, email me, or whatever you want to do. Send me your address. I will send you a signed copy.
Oh, that's very generous, sir. And I've got you recorded saying that. I will definitely do that. So thank you very much. But actually, speaking of books, we've been talking about books this whole time. But have you had time to be reading anything lately, Jim?
No, I have not. I
suppose you're moving and all that stuff.
Yeah, we started moving in May, and we actually physically moved the end of July. And it's been packing and getting ready, and making this arrangement, and spending money. Oh boy, spending money.
Oh, I completely understand. It sounds it's a lot of work moving across country. Yeah.
It's a good thing that Amazon pays me money for my books, because otherwise. My wife and I are both retired, actually, as far as working goes. This is my day job now. So, fortunately, we're very fortunate in that we're comfortable, thank God. But we're not rich, but all the money, buy my books, folks. Buy them. They're all under my name, Jim Christina, on Amazon or anywhere online. I'll forever love you. If you like westerns.
I mean, and yeah, definitely. It's funny because one last thing about just kind of a personal anecdote is that my grandfather, before he passed away, was always trying to get me to read Zane Grey, I think. And I really need to go back and check that out. I'm so behind on my reading, just in general. My ADHD really kicks in.
Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour and all those guys are writers of the 50s, 40s, 50s, and early 60s. And their heroes were 6 feet tall, square shouldered, wide jaw, narrow hips, never got dirty, never went to the bathroom, never said a swear word, never took care of their animals. It's just, the stories were
a little
fun.
less real. Yeah.
The stories were fun, but they weren't very real. And so that was part of my goal when I started writing, was to make the stories as gritty and as real as the times actually were. So
that's
there you have it.
More Unforgiven than Stagecoach. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I always mention Unforgiven when there's Western authors on this show because that's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Well, that's probably one of the most realistic Westerns that's been made ever.
Oh yeah, I bet. And you kind of have to hand it to Clint Eastwood directed that one, I believe, as well as starring in it.
Yeah.
And though honestly, my favorite character has got to be Gene Hackman, Little Bill.
Oh, Little Bill, yeah.
Yeah, Little Bill was scary dude.
He was.
He was, and that was just an amazing part. Anyway, that's kind of a ramble, but we are running out of time. So, Jim, where can we find your works, and where can people support you, and find you on your podcasts and radio and stuff?
You can find me on my website at jimchristina.net. You can go to blackdogpublishing.co. They've got all the works that Black Dog and Tuscany Bay Books has done. You can find me on Facebook at Jim Christina. You can find all of my books online in any online bookseller. Best place to go, of course, is Amazon.
Wonderful. Thank you for being on the show, Jim. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure, Tim.
And now just a little more business for all of you listeners. I have a book coming out. It's coming out on September 3rd. It's called Demon Scroll. If you're into epic fantasy, go and pre-order that book now. It's on Amazon.com, currently exclusive, because, we authors, we need some of those. Well, I'm not making excuses here. It's exclusive with Amazon. We need the sweet, sweet Amazon Kindle money for us fantasy authors. What is it called? Kindle Select, yes. So you'll be able to read it for free on September 3rd if you're in Kindle, if you have Kindle Unlimited, and you can pre-order it now for 99 cents. It's not a lot of money for you guys, but it's going to do a lot for me. So please back me up on this. And all my other books are still available on Amazon, except for the free books, which are available everywhere ebooks are downloaded. And those are The Mangrove Suite and 10 Liars, Ilsa, and Blue. Check that out. And thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good one.
That tears it.